There's a quiet line between owning property and truly having control over it, and I was about to find out just how blurry that line can get. This story starts with what should have been a simple, peaceful weekend camping at my own ranch lake, a place I bought years ago, tucked away from the city, where I imagined freedom. No neighbors, no interference, just me and nature. But what happened next wasn't just unexpected. It was surreal. The Homeowners Association, or HOA, that governs a nearby community somehow decided I was a trespasser. And instead of sorting things out civilly, they called the cops. The day began with excitement. I had planned a solo camping trip, eager to escape the noise and stress of everyday life. My ranch was a modest piece of land, with a small private lake perfect for fishing and unwinding. It was supposed to be mine, and mine alone, or so I thought. I arrived early in the afternoon, setting up my tent by the lake shore. The sun was warm, and the water shimmered peacefully. As I unpacked, I noticed a few cars driving slowly along the dirt road nearby. A couple people waved, which felt friendly at first, neighbors, maybe. But as the afternoon wore on, those waves turned into curious, sometimes suspicious looks. Then, things started to feel off. A white SUV parked nearby, and a man stepped out, clipboard in hand, watching me intently from a distance. Moments later, another vehicle appeared, and this time a woman emerged, snapping photos. My gut told me something wasn't right, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Hours passed. I fished quietly, enjoyed the solitude, and tried to shake off the feeling of being watched. But then, a knock on my camper door startled me. Outside stood two officers. They explained that the HOA had reported a trespasser camping on private property, and they were there to investigate. I showed them my deed, the official documents proving ownership of the ranch. The officers seemed a bit confused, but polite. However, the tension was already thick. The HOA representatives had apparently labeled me as someone who was not authorized to be there, trespassing on their land. It was then I learned the shocking truth. The HOA claimed ownership or control over the land I bought outright. They argued that my ranch, though legally mine, was within their jurisdiction and subject to their rules. Rules I never agreed to and never knew existed. That's when the situation escalated. What should have been a straightforward clarification turned into a battle over authority, boundaries, and rights. The HOA insisted that camping there violated their regulations. I insisted that it was my property, and I could do what I wanted. But as I stood there, caught between official police presence and an aggressive HOA, I realized this was far from over. The story had just begun, and the quiet ranch lake was about to become the front line of a strange, complicated fight. To be continued. The next day, after the police left with little resolution, I sat down to figure out what I was really dealing with. The documents in my hands clearly showed I owned the ranch, but the HOA's claim? They insisted the land was part of their territory, and their rules applied. Even though I had never signed anything agreeing to their authority, I started digging deeper. The HOA was formed by a nearby gated community, a neighborhood known for strict regulations, and an overzealous board. According to their website, their control extended not only to homes inside the gates, but also to adjacent land parcels, including, they claimed, parts of my ranch. At first, I thought it was a misunderstanding. Maybe their maps were wrong. But the more I researched, the more I realized this was no accident. The HOA's bylaws were intentionally vague, written to grab as much control as possible, including restricting camping, fires, and any outdoor activities without their approval. I contacted a local attorney to understand my rights. They explained that even though I legally owned the land, the HOA's covenants could place limits on how I used it. If those covenants were recorded and legally binding, that's when the nightmare started. The HOA threatened fines, legal action, and even trying to force a sale if I didn't comply with their rules. They argued that my camping, fishing, and even having guests on the property violated their regulations. Meanwhile, neighbors who supported the HOA began watching the ranch more closely. Some sent anonymous tips about illegal activities, while others tried to block access to the dirt road leading to the lake. I felt trapped in a strange paradox. Owning land, but being told I could not use it as I wished. The sense of ownership I had felt for years was slipping away, replaced by confusion, frustration, and a growing distrust of the HOA. But what really caught me off guard was when I found out the HOA had been entering the ranch without permission, sending their board members onto my property under guise of inspections and maintenance. I had no idea they were trespassing. With the cops called on me while the HOA was crossing my property lines unchecked, I realized this was not just about rules. It was about power and control, and I was ready to fight back. The next move was clear. I had to document everything. I started installing cameras around the ranch, especially near the access points. If the HOA was trespassing, I needed proof. Within days, I caught them on video, board members walking across my property, peering into my camper, and even checking the locks on gates I had installed. The videos confirmed what I suspected. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules. They were actively ignoring property lines and ignoring my ownership. Yet, whenever I confronted them or the local police about it, they insisted the land fell under their control. What made it worse was the HOA's growing campaign to turn neighbors against me. Rumors spread that I was illegally camping or disrupting the community. Even though I owned the land, people began to question my presence there. I reached out to local officials, trying to get clarity on the jurisdiction issue. Was the HOA truly allowed to enforce rules on landowners like me? The answer was murky. Some said the HOA's covenants might apply. Others said their claim was weak, especially if the land was outside the gated community's boundaries. Amid all this, the HOA sent formal letters demanding I stop camping and remove all personal property from the ranch. They warned of hefty fines and legal proceedings. But what was most infuriating was the arrogance in their tone, as if I was the problem in a perfectly regulated world. My attorney advised me prepare for a legal battle. The HOA had deep pockets, and I was just one owner trying to enjoy my property. But I wasn't backing down. This was my land, my investment, and my peace of mind at stake. In response, I organized a quiet, peaceful gathering at the ranch with a few supportive neighbors who also felt the HOA had overstepped. We wanted to show that owning property should mean freedom, not fear of a powerful association. But the HOA didn't take kindly to the show of resistance. They ramped up their patrols, calling law enforcement more frequently and even installing no trespassing signs on paths leading to the lake, signs that actually encroached on my property. Tensions were rising. What started as a weekend camping trip was turning into a full-blown conflict between a determined landowner and an aggressive HOA with questionable claims. As weeks passed, the battle over my ranch lake escalated beyond what I ever imagined. The HOA had gone from passive-aggressive to downright hostile. Their board meetings, which I wasn't invited to, included plans to reclaim what they called their territory. One morning, I arrived at the ranch to find that the HOA had installed a locked gate across the dirt road leading to my property. No notice, no permission, just a steel gate blocking the only vehicle access. It was an outright barricade, designed to keep me out as much as to keep others away. I tried to get answers, but the HOA board was stonewalling. Their letters insisted the gate was legal and necessary for community safety, but it was clearly aimed at cutting me off from my own land. With no other option, I had to find an alternative route, something that meant walking miles through rough terrain just to get to my campsite. What should have been a simple weekend retreat turned into a logistical nightmare. Meanwhile, the police were less helpful than before. They told me the HOA's authority complicated things, and unless there was clear criminal activity, they couldn't intervene in property disputes. The legal gray zone worked in the HOA's favor. I started to realize that owning land near a powerful HOA could sometimes mean owning very little in practical terms. The HOA used its rules, its influence, and even local officials' reluctance to challenge them to exert control without clear accountability. Despite this, I refused to give up. I documented every encounter, every letter, and every attempt the HOA made to interfere with my use of the ranch. I was building a case, not just for myself, but for anyone caught in a similar fight. One particularly tense afternoon, I caught the HOA's maintenance crew removing my fishing dock from a lake. No warning, no permission, just bulldozers tearing down what I built with my own hands. That was the moment I knew this was war. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules. They were actively trying to erase my presence. The destruction of my fishing dock was a turning point. It wasn't just about property anymore. It was about respect, something the HOA clearly had no intention of giving. Watching heavy machinery tear apart something I built with my own hands felt like a personal attack. I immediately contacted my lawyer, who advised me to file a restraining order against the HOA's maintenance crew to prevent any further unauthorized destruction. At the same time, we began preparing for a legal challenge to the HOA's overreach. But the HOA didn't back down. Instead, they doubled down on their tactics, sending letters threatening to fine me thousands of dollars for violations and demanding immediate compliance with their rules. They even suggested the possibility of foreclosure if I refused. Despite the mounting pressure, I refused to be intimidated. I reached out to local media, hoping to bring public attention to the HOA's heavy-handed behavior. I knew the more eyes on the story, the harder it would be for the HOA to act without scrutiny. Public support began to build. Neighbors and community members who had been quiet before started sharing their own stories of HOA abuses. It became clear I was not alone, and the HOA's reputation took a hit. Still, the legal battle was draining. Court dates, paperwork, and negotiations consumed my time and energy. I had to fight not only the HOA, but also the complex web of property laws, covenants, and local ordinances that blurred the lines of ownership and control. Through it all, the ranch remained my sanctuary, my symbol of freedom and defiance. Every visit reminded me why I fought so hard to keep it. The lake, the trees, the open sky, they were worth every battle. But the fight was far from over. To be continued. The courtroom felt cold and unyielding, but I stood firm. After months of battles, legal filings, media attention, and constant stress, I was ready to prove one simple truth. I own my land, and no HOA could strip away my rights. The judge reviewed the evidence. Property deeds, video footage of the HOA trespassing, and testimony from neighbors who had witnessed the conflict firsthand. Slowly, the narrative shifted. It became clear the HOA had overstepped, enforcing rules where they had no authority and trespassing on private property without consent. In a decisive ruling, the court confirmed my ownership rights and ordered the HOA to remove all gates, signs, and barriers blocking access to my ranch. They were also instructed to cease all unauthorized entry and to stop issuing fines or threats related to my camping and property use. The victory was more than legal. It was personal. It proved that even when powerful groups try to bully and intimidate, ownership and freedom can prevail with persistence and proof. After the ruling, I returned to my ranch lake, this time without fear or hesitation. The water glistened in the sun, the trees stood tall and quiet, and the land finally felt like mine again. Though the scars of the fight remained, the ranch became a symbol, not just of ownership, but of standing up against unfair control. The HOA had lost, and I had reclaimed not just my property, but my peace of mind. This story serves as a warning and an inspiration. Know your rights, document everything, and never back down when it comes to your own land. The fight for freedom on your own property is real, and sometimes it's the only way to keep what's yours.